Hello everybody, my name is Tommy and welcome to Air Workshop. Today I'm going to continue the build of the Ooznest Workbee Z1 Plus CNC. Now this is the final build video in the series, so by the end of this video I will have the machine moving under its own power and all the final setup that's required on the machine completed. So let's get into it. Okay, the next portion of the build is actually super simple. It is adding the drag chains, 2 limit switches and running all the wiring for the machine. Now the reason I say this is super simple is all the wires are numbered as to what wire it is, and the instructions are clear as to what drag chain, etc. you run the wires through. So I have went ahead, I've added the 2 drag chains, I've added the 2 limit switches, and I've added the back of the control box here in front of me. And I'll give a quick overview of the way the wiring and the drag chains are fitted, and the main thing then will be adding the controller and wiring the controller. Okay, we'll start off with the X drag chain, which attaches to the X gantry. Now, through this, you are either going to have 2 or 3 wires, depending on whether you have a touch probe or not. So you have the touch probe wire, the limit switch wire, and the motor feed wire to the stepper motor. Now, I ran the 3 wires together at the one time when I had the drag chain laid out across the machine, so that I wasn't trying to feed them through individually. And once I had that done, it's just pull it up, and there's 3 bolts on this end, and there's a bolt and a T-nut on the other end into the top of the extrusion. I have went ahead and I have cable tied the wire for the touch probe to the motor wire, and I've made sure to keep enough slack to allow for the movement of the Z axis. The next thing I done was over here, there's a little plate, little plastic plate that you add a limit switch to. So I have just put that in place, and the wire actually runs in the top groove of the extrusion across the width of the machine, and there is a little cover that you push into the track to cover the wire and hold the wire in place. And hopefully you can see on camera that 4 wires are now coming out at the same spot on the other side, just at the back of the control box. And then we have the Y drag chain, which is running on the bench along the side of the machine, and through that we have the wire going to the stepper motor on the opposite side of the machine. We have the stepper motor wire for this side. We also have a limit switch which is added here with a little plastic plate and 1 bolt and T-nut, so I have that added. And also through this we need to run the power feed wire from the power feed and through the emergency stop through this drag chain as well, and this will be eventually positioned towards the front of the machine once I get a little bit further on. This cable would normally be pushed into the bottom track in the extrusion. I haven't done that yet because I feel that the wire is a little bit tight to get to the controller, so I want to make sure that I get it into the controller before I actually pin that in place finally. So on the opposite end of the Y drag chain, which is attached with 3 bolts again onto the drag chain mount, we have the 4 wires running through the drag chain, and I have also added the wire going to the stepper motor on the X axis. So now I have 5 wires at the end of that drag chain. Now, like I said, I went ahead and I added the back for the control box. Now that's only 4 little bolts and 4 drop-in T-nuts into the back of the extrusion. So with that in place, I can now go ahead and actually install the circuit board into the box, and then I can start feeding in all the wires and hooking it up. Before I install the circuit board, I wanted to attach the wire that will go to the antenna for the Wi-Fi on the machine, because this is a Wi-Fi machine. If you don't have a Wi-Fi, you don't need to do this, but you push that in place in the top corner there as instructed, because it'll be very difficult to get in to push that in place once the board is in. So now it's just 4 bolts through the 4 holes in the back of the box and to put that in place. Okay, with the control board now in place, the next thing I need to do is gather up all the wires from the Y drag chain It is to be fed through this hole here in the Y plate and up and in through the top hole of the control box. And I also want to add in the 4 wires that I have coming across from the other drag chain. So this will all go into a little shroud that Ooznest supply. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. It's going to probably be a little bit fiddly, so I'm not going to video it. So when I have all this into the control box, then I'll come back to you. Okay, with all the wires now brought into the control box, as you can see, they come in, go out through the Y plate here, up. The other ones are brought into the back, and they're all brought in through the top hole here. It is just a case of following the instructions and plugging everything in to the correct terminal in the control board. Now, I did go ahead and I did hook up the power cable to the connector as instructed. Now, you just need to put a little bit of a kink in the bottom of them to get him to shove up into the block connector. But after that, we're concentrating first on the stepper motors. So this is the bank of connections we're looking at first. So to start with, on the bottom one, we're looking for limit switch 2. And all of these are numbered, like I said there, you can see that is limit switch 2. And it can only go on in one direction. So you just plug it in like that. The next one is limit switch 1, which is this one. And again, it can only go on in the one direction, like that. And finally, it's limit switch 0, like that. Now, the wire on that one is a little bit tight, but it is getting there. And we can also now put on, if you have the connection for the touch probe. And that is the next one up, like that. Next up then is the motor wires, and they are going to be connected to this bank of connectors over here. So starting from the bottom, we're wanting the blue wire, number 6. So again, can only go on to the connection one way, like that. Next up is the yellow number 4, which is this one here. Then we have number 3. And finally, number 5, which is the green. Like that. So now all those are actually wired in place. Next up, I have already put the little fixing for the aerial through the top of the cover, just to keep the wire out of the way. So I just need to screw on the antenna, like that. And before now, I put the cover on this, which will include the fans. I just want to tidy up this wiring across to one side of the box, nice and neat as well. And with those now nice and tidy across to one side of the box, and the complete loom cable tied from inside to outside at the top, we now move on to the cover. Now I have the cover here, and I have already installed the 2 little fans that are required on the motor. Now it's just important to put those on the inside with the sticker behind the inside so you can actually see it. So it's just a case then of dropping the door onto the hinge. The wire for the fans connects to the bottom connection of this bank of connections. So you pop that on like that. And then it's just a case of close the door and put in 2 bolts and 2 nuts on the back. And that's the controller box finished. Okay, with that now completed, it's now time for me to connect this to my laptop. Now, I am not going to cover this in the video because it will vary depending on whether you have an Ethernet connection or a Wi-Fi connection, and it'll even vary as to whether you have a Mac or a Windows computer. But all I can say is it is a very simple process. It is set out in the instructions step by step, so it is very simple to do. I would like to take this opportunity again to say that I have created a playlist of the complete build of this CNC, and I will leave a link to that in the description of this video. And I will also leave a link in the description of the video to the Ooznest website, and that is an affiliate link. So if you use that link to go to the Ooznest website and make a purchase of a CNC or whatever on the website, it just means that I get a small little commission in return, which will help this channel. Okay, with the machine now connected to the laptop, you will end up with a control panel screen like this on the laptop here. Now, the first thing it's going to ask you to do is enter the size of the machine that you have, and the second thing you will need to do then is actually test the limit switches. So that's just going around and touching all the limit switches with your finger to make sure that they're actually triggering. If they're not, you can't go any further until you have that issue sorted out. So the next thing to do with this machine is actually to home all the axes. Now, before you do that, it's important that you go back and tighten the nut blocks that we left loose during the build. So I have tightened those, so now it's just a case of homing each axis individually and then home them all. So I'm going to start with the Z axis, and as you can see, that's homing up. Then I'm going to do the Z axis, and that'll go across until it touches the limit switch. It'll bounce off it and then creep back onto it again. And then I am going to home the Y axis, and that'll do the very same thing until it reaches the back corner of the machine. And once you have the 3 axes homed separately and you know that everything is working correctly, you then hit home all, and as you see, it will actually pop off all the limit switches a little bit and then go back on to home all 3 axes independently. Now, the next step in this is going to be to tension the lead screws. So you have the lead screw in the X and the 2 lead screws in the Y need to be tensioned. Now to do that, I'm going to jog the machine to a central position, so it'll be centered on the Y and centered on the X. Now as you can see, I have jogged the Y back to a central position and the X to a central position to tension the lead screws. Now I will say at this stage, it's important that you leave the machine turned on when you're tightening the lead screws, because that's what actually locks the stepper motor. If you turn the machine off, the stepper motor can turn freely and it just won't tension for you. So it's important that you leave the machine on for this stage. So let's do one of the lead screws. Okay, to tension the lead screw, first you need to remove the little lock and collar, the rubber bush and the flange radial bearing on both inside ends on the lead screw. And you also need to loosen off the 2 lock nuts in the carriage. The next thing you want then is the tensioning knob, and you screw that on to the end like that, up again the collar, and then you loosen off the outside collar like that, and then you turn the tensioning knob nice and slowly, and you'll feel that the stepper motor will click over like that, and just before it clicks over again, you can kind of feel how much pressure you put on it. You then tighten that lock and collar back in place like that, and that is the correct amount of tension on that lead screw. So then you can remove your tensioning knob and then reinstall the flanged radial bearing, the rubber bush and both collars on both ends. And you also need then to retighten the nut blocks in the carriage, and when you're doing that, you just make sure that you push both nut blocks towards each other when you're tightening them, and that'll remove any backlash that's left in that carriage. With all the lock and collars and radial bearings back in place, we now move on to the flexible coupler on the stepper motor. Now we might have created a little bit of tension into that by tightening it. So on the stepper motor side, this is important. This is the stepper motor side, you just loosen the little grub screw and loosen the lock and collar nut just to release any tension that might have been put into the coupler, like that, and then tighten it back up. Like that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that on the other two lead screws, and we'll come back then to the next thing that needs to be adjusted on the machine. So next up on the machine is the Y-axis alignment. So with the machine in the homed position and with the power to the machine turned off, on the side that has the limit switch, you measure from the back plate of the machine to the Y plate, there, like that. And once you have that measurement, you move then across to the opposite side of the machine. So now at the opposite side of the machine, you measure in exactly the same place to the same point, and if you have a gap to the Y plate or if it's too tight, you can now adjust that by turning the lead screw on the stepper motor. Like that. So that now both sides are equal, and you can go back and check it for a second time as well, just to make sure that you now have your Y-axis alignment corrected. Okay, when I'm still at the back of the machine, I had pointed out earlier in the video that I had left the wire going across to the far stepper motor. I had left that loose because I thought it was a little bit tight to get into the control box. Now, once I had the machine wired up, I still thought that that wire was a little bit on the tight side, and I was putting a little bit of pressure on the connection over here. So when I was actually fitting the Y drag chain to the bench, I had noticed that the drag chain didn't need to be quite as long as it did. So I actually removed 3 links out of the Y drag chain, and that freed up another 100 millimeters of wire to run across. So now I have the wire tucked in where it's supposed to be tucked in into the extrusion, and I still have a little bit of play over here at the connection. So just a little tip, if you have a problem that way, that it might be possible to shorten the drag chain by a link or two if needed. Okay, the final stage in the setup of the machine is to go back over the Y carriage and the X carriage and the Z and adjust the wheels to make sure that they are adjusted correctly. So you're just checking the adjustment using the eccentric screws as we did through the build. Now I'm not going to cover that again because it's just a little bit fiddly to try and get the camera angles on the machine now that it's together. Now, the other thing then that needs to be done is I need to add some end caps over the exposed end of the lead screws. I have to put 4 brackets on to secure the machine down to the bench. Now that's only just, like I said, 4 angle brackets, some bolts and slot-in T-nuts. And then at that stage, we're going to be getting very close to having this machine completed. Okay, now that I have the caps on over the end of the lead screws, and the brackets are on and the machine is secured to the bench, I went ahead and I added a small temporary spile board to the machine. Now I only added a small one for the moment because I haven't really decided on what the best clamping system for me is going to be, and I didn't want to be putting on the full spile board to have to take it off again to modify it to whatever way I want it. So when I do decide on what way I'm going to do the spile board, I will do a separate video completely on that. And I will do other videos on the machine where I'll be adding, say, dust extraction, etc. to the machine. But in principle now, this machine is ready to go. That's the build finished, except for one more step. And I wanted to leave this to last because it makes it feel a little bit more complete, and that is adding the nameplate. And with that now screwed in place, I can officially say that the build of this Ooznest Workbee Z1 Plus CNC has now finally been completed. And I would again at this stage like to thank Ryan and all the team at Ooznest for the opportunity of having this machine on my channel. And I must say that building this machine from the very start till now has been really enjoyable, and I have to also say that it has been very, very straightforward, considering the instructions are very well laid out and clear to understand. So that's where I'm going to leave this video. So as usual, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel and you haven't already done so, maybe you consider subscribing and we'll be able to see this thing up in action. So we'll start making dust in the next video. So until then, good luck.